They smiled, raising their glasses to toast the new collection. My collection, born from my ideas, my heart. And then, just moments later, in the very office I'd designed, the one filled with the scent of my latest creation, they handed me a termination letter. Cold, final, like a bass note fading into nothingness. I'm Rosalind Hayes. I was the one who breathed life into every vial, every bottle of Aetheria Botanicals, transforming it from a small workshop, a dream whispered among alembics and rare essences, into a name people coveted, a whisper on the lips of connoisseurs. I used to believe that passion, that quiet, unwavering dedication, would speak for itself, that genuine artistry would always find its light. But I was wrong, so profoundly wrong. Because some people, you see, they only hear the siren call of ambition, and they'll crush anything, anyone to answer it. If you've ever felt that sting, that sharp, disbelieving pang of betrayal from the very people you trusted, the ones you nurtured, then stay with me. Because my story, well, it only truly began the moment they thought it was over. That day, it's etched in my memory, not as a harsh, jagged scar, but more like a persistent, unwelcome fragrance that clings, refusing to dissipate. The launch event for Midnight Bloom had been a triumph. The air in the gallery was thick with its complex notes, a hint of night-blooming jasmine, a whisper of dark vetiver, the unexpected warmth of cardamom I'd spent months perfecting. Journalists buzzed, buyers placed orders, and Eleanor, my sister Ellie, she was radiant. She stood beside our uncle, Marcus Thorne, the CEO, soaking in the applause. Julian Croft, my oldest friend, now our head of marketing, was right there with them, his smile a little too bright, a little too practiced. I watched them from the edge of the room, a quiet satisfaction settling in me. This scent, this was a piece of my soul, and it was successful. I allowed myself a small internal nod. Then Marcus caught my eye, a brief, almost imperceptible signal. Rosalind, a word in your office when things quiet down? An hour later, the celebratory champagne flutes were mostly empty. The chatter had subsided. I walked back to my sanctuary, the small, sunlit room at the back of our headquarters, filled with botanical prints, antique perfumers' organs, and the comforting chaos of my work. They were already there. Ellie, Marcus, Julian. The air, once vibrant with creative energy, now felt still, heavy. Ellie avoided my gaze, fiddling with a delicate silver bracelet I'd given her for her 21st birthday. Marcus cleared his throat, his usual affable expression replaced by a strained formality. Julian just looked at the floor, at his expensive shoes. Rosalind, Marcus began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. This is difficult. He pushed a crisp, white envelope across my polished oak desk. My name was typed neatly on the front. The board has decided Aetheria Botanicals is moving in a new creative direction, and, well, your services will no longer be required. A new creative direction? I'd been the creative direction for 10 years. The words hung there, sharp and sterile, like the smell of rubbing alcohol in a place that should have been filled with bergamot and rose. I looked at Ellie. Her eyes, usually so bright, so full of life, the same eyes that used to watch me with awe as I blended oils as a child, were now carefully blank, a little too carefully. Julian shifted his weight, the leather of his chair creaking in the sudden, suffocating silence. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. What was there to say? The decision was made. The smiles at the party, the congratulations, they were a prelude to this, a perfectly orchestrated performance. I picked up the envelope. My fingers felt numb. I remember thinking absurdly about the paper quality. Expensive, a final, ironic touch of luxury. I see, I said. My voice sounded distant, even to my own ears. I started to gather a few personal things. My grandmother's mortars and pestles, a small, worn, leather-bound journal filled with half-formed formulas and pressed flowers, a framed photograph of a field of lavender in Provence that had inspired my first successful blend. Each item felt heavy, imbued with a significance they couldn't possibly understand. They stripped me of my access card, my title, as if trying to erase my very essence from the place I'd poured my soul into. They thought they were cutting me off. Little did they know, the roots I'd planted ran far deeper than they could ever imagine. As I walked out, past the gleaming Aetheria Botanicals logo I'd helped design, a wave of profound sadness washed over me. But beneath it, something else stirred. A quiet resolve. A flicker. I had, in a way, anticipated something. Not this, not exactly, But the subtle shifts, the changing currents, I hadn't been entirely blind. The air had been changing for a while. It's funny, isn't it? How loyalty can become a forgotten note in a composition, easily overpowered by the louder, more aggressive sense of ambition and greed. I'd built Aetheria Botanicals from the ground up, or rather, from the earth up. My childhood wasn't filled with dolls and tea parties, but with the heady aromas of my grandmother's herb garden, the delicate alchemy of transforming petals and roots into tinctures and oils. She taught me to listen to the plants, to understand their language, their secrets. That passion became my life. Aetheria started in a small, rented workshop, a space that always smelled of damp earth, beeswax, and hope. I spent years there, sometimes working 16-hour days, surrounded by alembics, beakers, and endless rows of tiny amber bottles. I'd travel to remote corners of the world, seeking out rare blooms, exotic resins, unique woods. I remember a trip to the Grasse region in France, bargaining with a gruff, old farmer for a small batch of his finest cenifolia roses, their fragrance so pure it could make you weep. Or a trek through the humid jungles of Madagascar, searching for a specific vanilla orchid that only bloomed under the light of a full moon. These weren't just ingredients. They were stories, memories, fragments of the earth itself. When Ellie, my younger sister, graduated with a business degree, brimming with enthusiasm but lacking direction, it felt natural to bring her in. She was family, bright, charming, with a knack for people. I saw her potential. I envisioned her handling the business side, the marketing, freeing me to focus on creation. I taught her everything I knew about the world of perfumery, not just the science, but the art, the soul. I shared my suppliers, my contacts, my carefully guarded notebooks filled with nascent formulas. I'd watch her sometimes, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she tried to distinguish the subtle difference between Bulgarian and damask rose oil, and a warmth would spread through me. I thought, this is legacy. Then Julian Croft re-entered my life. We'd been inseparable in college, dreaming big dreams over lukewarm coffee in the campus library. He was smart, driven, with a sharp marketing mind. When he reached out, looking for a new opportunity after a stint at a larger, more soulless corporation, I vouched for him, convinced Marcus that Julian was exactly what Aetheria needed to reach the next level. He joined as our head of marketing, and for a while, it was perfect. We were a team. Or so I thought. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like a single discordant note in an otherwise harmonious chord. Ellie started spending more time with Julian, less time in the lab with me. Their conversations were peppered with terms like market penetration, brand scalability, demographic targeting. My carefully crafted artisanal approach, the very thing that made Aetheria unique, began to be described as niche, limited, even old-fashioned. Ideas I'd present in creative meetings, ideas rooted in authenticity and the unique stories of my ingredients, would be met with polite but firm suggestions from Julian, often echoed by Ellie, to make them more commercially viable, more palatable to a broader audience. My input on packaging, on campaign imagery, which I'd always overseen, was increasingly managed. Important emails regarding strategic decisions sometimes found their way to my inbox a day late, or not at all. A misplaced memo here, an overlooked invitation there. Meetings I should have led were suddenly co-chaired, or I'd find myself merely a consultant on projects I'd initiated. Then came the whispers, questioning my methods, my resistance to innovation. My own sister, the one I'd taught to distinguish a top note from a heart note, was now orchestrating my obsolescence. I remember one particularly painful incident. We were developing a new line, Terra, inspired by the raw, earthy scents of the forest floor after rain. I'd sourced an incredible, rare moss absolute from a sustainable farm in Ireland. It was expensive, yes, but its olfactory profile was unlike anything else. During a crucial formulation review, which Marcus attended, Ellie, prompted by Julian, presented an alternative, a synthetic moss compound, cheaper, more consistent, and, in her words, more aligned with our new cost-efficiency model. Marcus, who always prioritized the bottom line, was swayed. My protests about compromising the integrity of the Aetheria name, about the soul of the fragrance, were dismissed as artistic temperament. The final blow, the one that paved the way for my dismissal, was a cleverly orchestrated crisis. A significant batch of our flagship scent, Lob, was reported to have a quality issue. Customers complained it smelled different, weaker. An internal investigation led by Julian, with Ellie providing key insights from the production side she now heavily influenced, pointed to an unauthorized and undocumented alteration in the original formula. The insinuation was clear. I, in my supposed resistance to change, or perhaps out of simple error, had compromised the product. It was a lie, of course. The formula hadn't been touched by me, but the narrative was set. I was becoming a liability. The ground had been meticulously prepared for my exit, and I, lost in my world of essences and absolutes, had noticed the wilting leaves, but hadn't fully grasped the extent of the rot at the roots. Until that envelope landed on my desk. You know, it's a strange thing, foresight. It's not always a crystal ball. Sometimes it's just a quiet, nagging feeling in your gut, a subtle shift in the wind that tells you a storm is coming, even if the sky is still blue. I'd felt that shift at Aetheria Botanicals for a couple of years before the end. It wasn't one single event, but a slow erosion of the values we'd started with. Marcus, my uncle, for all his business acumen, had always been more focused on profit margins than on provenance. His commitment to the true artistry of perfumery felt conditional. And as Ellie and Julian gained more influence, I saw the company's soul being diluted, like a precious attar stretched thin with cheaper carrier oils. That's when I started to build my secret garden, as I came to call it. It began not as a plan for revenge, or even for self-preservation, but more as a way to protect the essence of what I loved, the craft itself. About 5 years before they showed me the door, I quietly established Seraphine Holdings. It was a private investment fund, a completely separate entity, its purpose, at least initially, to support small, independent artisans and growers of rare botanical ingredients, the very heart of true perfumery. I used my knowledge of the industry, my contacts, to identify unique, often struggling suppliers who were being squeezed out by larger corporations. Seraphine Holdings would offer them fair prices, long-term contracts, and in some cases acquire small stakes to ensure their survival and the continued availability of these precious materials. It was a way for me to stay connected to the authentic soul of my craft, even as Aetheria itself seemed to be drifting. And if I'm being honest, there was a part of me, a very quiet, very pragmatic part, that knew these resources, these connections, could one day be valuable, strategic. The process was painstaking, meticulous. Everything was done through layers of legal entities, trusted intermediaries. My name appeared nowhere directly. I learned about shell companies, about proxy investments. It was a world away from my lab, from the poetry of scent, but I approached it with the same dedication, the same attention to detail I'd apply to a complex formula. I'd spend late nights, after a long day of blending and testing, poring over financial statements, market analyses, legal documents. The scent of old paper and ink mingled with the lingering traces of jasmine and sandalwood on my skin. Slowly, methodically, Seraphine Holdings grew, and as it did, its focus subtly shifted. It began acquiring minority stakes, not just in suppliers, but in other small artisanal perfume houses, companies that shared my philosophy. And then, about 3 years ago, an opportunity arose. A block of shares in Aetheria Botanicals itself became available from an early disgruntled investor. Seraphine Holdings acquired them. Silently. No one knew. Not Marcus. Certainly not Ellie or Julian. They were too busy with their internal politics, with their rebranding initiatives, and their PowerPoint presentations. They saw me as the slightly eccentric artist in the lab, perhaps a little out of touch with the real world of business. They underestimated me, profoundly. Over the next few years, Seraphine Holdings continued its quiet acquisition, piece by piece, share by share. It was like composing a very complex perfume, adding one rare ingredient at a time, building the base, then the heart, then the top notes, until the final accord was almost complete. And then, just 1 week before that fateful meeting in my office, 1 week before they handed me that crisp white envelope, Seraphine Holdings finalized the deal that gave it 72% ownership of Aetheria Botanicals. 72%. I owned it. All of it. The name, the formulas, the inventory, the building, everything. I sat on that knowledge. I let it settle. I could have acted then, of course. Could have called my own meeting, asserted my control. But I wanted to see. I needed to see. Who would show their hand first? who would be the one to drive the blade in. I didn't have to wait long. They played their parts exactly as I, in my most cynical moments, might have predicted. While they were busy playing their little power games, redecorating offices, and vying for titles, I was tending to a different kind of garden, one whose blooms they wouldn't see until it was too late. Every share I acquired was a seed, patiently waiting for the right season to sprout. And that season, it turned out, was just around the corner. 2 days. That's all the time that passed between my dismissal and their grand celebration. 2 days. They certainly didn't waste any time moving on, did they? Aetheria Botanicals hosted a lavish party at the Crystal Ballroom, one of those opulent downtown hotels. The invitation, which I'd accidentally received in my personal email, a small oversight on their part, I suppose, proclaimed it as an event to celebrate a new era of creative vision. My stomach turned a little at the phrasing. My era apparently had concluded. I wasn't planning on going, of course, but curiosity, it's a powerful scent, and I had 1 or 2 things to arrange. Ellie, I heard, made quite an entrance. She wore a shimmering silver gown that probably cost more than my first year's salary. Julian was, naturally, by her side, ever the attentive courtier, champagne flute in hand, his laughter a little too loud, echoing through the glittering hall. Marcus Thorne, my dear uncle, gave a speech, full of platitudes about dynamic leadership and bold new directions, with several pointed, though unnamed, references to the necessary changes that had been made to streamline innovation. I could almost picture the scene, the clinking glasses, the polite applause, the undercurrent of gossip. They were toasting their success, their new beginnings, oblivious, completely oblivious. Because while they were sipping champagne and congratulating themselves, I had already set my own plan in motion. Earlier that day, a series of emails had gone out, formal, urgent, sent from the legal department of Seraphine Holdings. They convened an emergency meeting of the Aetheria Botanicals Board of Directors. Attendance, mandatory, time 7 p.m. sharp, that very evening. The subject line was deliberately vague, urgent review of corporate governance and ownership structure. And the signature at the bottom of the summons? Rosalind Hayes, chairperson, Seraphine Holdings. I imagined the confusion, the flurry of hushed phone calls. Ellie would have been indignant. What is this? Why wasn't I consulted? Julian, ever the opportunist, might have tried to spin it. Perhaps it's about formally announcing your new role, Ellie? Your official appointment as Chief Creative Officer? Marcus. Marcus would have been uneasy. He knew on some level that I wasn't the type to simply fade away. The boardroom at Aetheria's headquarters was on the top floor with panoramic views of the city. I arrived a few minutes before 7. The long mahogany table, usually a stage for Marcus's pronouncements, was empty, save for the neatly arranged notepads and water glasses. I took my seat, not my old seat off to the side, the one reserved for the creative. I took the seat at the head of the table, Marcus's seat. They trickled in, one by one, their party attire looking out of place in the sterile formality of the boardroom. Ellie was flushed, a mixture of annoyance and triumph still on her face from the party. Julian looked wary. Marcus entered last, his expression thunderous. Rosalind, what in God's name is the meaning of this? You have no right. I let him sputter. I simply looked at him, then at Ellie, then at Julian. Their shock was palpable. Ellie's hand flew to her mouth, her champagne-induced confidence visibly deflating. Julian's face went pale, the color draining away like watered-down wine. I slid a slim, leather-bound file across the polished table towards Mr. Henderson, the company's long-standing corporate lawyer, a man who prided himself on his meticulousness. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice calm even. Perhaps you'd be kind enough to review these documents. Aloud, if you please. He looked at me, then at the file, a frown creasing his forehead. He opened it, and as he read, his eyes widened. He shuffled the papers, read them again. The silence in that boardroom was more potent than any perfume I'd ever created. Their faces, a cocktail of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. I let the quiet do its work before I spoke. Mr. Henderson finally looked up, his voice hoarse. This can't be. These documents, they appear to be entirely in order. They show that a holding company, Seraphine Holdings, has acquired a controlling interest in Aetheria Botanicals. 72% to be exact. He paused, then turned slowly towards me. And according to these records, Miss Rosalind Hayes is the sole owner and designated chairperson of Seraphine Holdings. Ellie gasped. This is a joke. It has to be. She was just our perfumer. I met her gaze. No anger, just a quiet certainty. Correction, Eleanor. I was your master perfumer. Now, I'm the reason your paycheck exists, or rather, existed. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. This is an outrage. You manipulated us. You went behind our backs. I leaned forward slightly. No, Uncle Marcus. I simply played the game. The same game you all taught me so well. You just never imagined the quiet woman in the lab could learn the rules, let alone win. Then I slid another, much thicker file across the table. And now, for the first order of business under new leadership, we'll be discussing immediate changes to the executive team based on, let's call them ethical considerations and performance reviews. Inside that file was everything. Records of their manipulations, emails detailing their plans to discredit me, evidence of them sourcing cheaper, inferior ingredients for our signature lines to cut costs, reports showing how Julian had diverted marketing funds for personal gain, even recordings. Yes, recordings. One must always be prepared. Eleanor snatched the folder, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. Her face, already pale, turned a ghastly shade of white. Julian looked like he was about to be physically ill. Marcus just stared, speechless, his bravado completely gone. Effective immediately, I continued, my voice still calm. Eleanor Vance, Julian Croft, and Marcus Thorne are removed from all positions and responsibilities within Aetheria Botanicals. I paused, letting the words sink in. Security will escort you from the premises. Your personal belongings will be packed and sent to you. It was done. The harvest was complete. You'd think that would be the end of it, wouldn't you? The dramatic boardroom scene, the ousting of the betrayers, a neat, satisfying conclusion. But some people, when their world crumbles, don't just accept defeat gracefully. They claw, they scratch, they try to drag you down into the rubble with them. After I retook control of Aetheria Botanicals, my first priority was to restore its integrity, to bring back the quality, the artistry, the soul they had tried to dilute. I spent weeks in the lab, reformulating, sourcing the finest ingredients again, reassuring our suppliers, and, most importantly, our loyal customers, that the Aetheria they loved was back. The work was cleansing, like clearing away deadwood to allow new growth. But Eleanor and Julian, they weren't going to go quietly. The initial shock wore off, replaced by a bitter, desperate resentment. It started with small, petty acts. Anonymous, negative reviews of our products started appearing online, filled with specific, often false details that only an insider could know. Then came the whispers to industry journalists, attempts to plant stories about my hostile takeover and unstable leadership. A few loyal, long-term employees I'd had to let go. Those who had been too deeply complicit in Marcus and Ellie's schemes were, I suspect, easily persuaded to spread discontent. Eleanor, with what little capital she had, tried to launch her own perfume brand. She even had the audacity to call it Elysian Scents, a name too close to Aetheria for comfort. She used formulas and concepts she'd, well, let's just say borrowed during her time with me. But creating a successful perfume isn't just about having a recipe. It's about understanding the nuances, the balance, the very soul of the ingredients. Her creations were hollow echoes, flat and uninspired. And when potential investors and retailers did their due diligence, the shadow of her unethical departure from Aetheria and the quiet but persistent rumors of intellectual property theft made them wary. Her venture fizzled out within 6 months, leaving her with nothing but debt and a tarnished reputation. Julian, on the other hand, tried to leverage his marketing contacts. He approached several rival perfume houses, confident that his experience at Aetheria would make him a valuable asset. But the world of artisanal perfumery, while competitive, is also surprisingly small. Word travels fast. The story of his betrayal, his complicity in attempting to oust the very founder who had mentored him, it wasn't a good look. Doors quietly closed in his face. No dramatic confrontations, just a series of polite rejections, unanswered calls. He found himself increasingly isolated, his once bright future dimming considerably. I didn't actively do anything to thwart them, I didn't have to. They were self-destructing, undone by their own greed and lack of genuine talent. Their desperation, however, did escalate. I started receiving unsettling, anonymous emails, vague threats, accusations of corporate espionage on my part. My home security system, which I'd upgraded significantly, recorded a clumsy, aborted attempt to disable the cameras one night. Nothing was taken, but the message was clear. They were trying to intimidate me, to unnerve me. They tried to fight back, of course, like wasps whose nest had been disturbed. But their stings were clumsy, born of desperation, not strategy. They didn't understand the game was already over. They just hadn't smelled the ashes yet. It was almost pitiful. Almost. But I had learned my lesson about underestimating the lengths people would go to when backed into a corner. I documented everything, quietly, meticulously, just in case. My focus, however, remained on Aetheria, on rebuilding, on creating beauty again. The lingering bitterness of their actions was a discordant note I was determined to resolve into a more harmonious, peaceful accord. Just when I thought the last of the unpleasant odors had finally cleared, when Aetheria Botanicals was thriving again, its reputation restored, its scents gracing the pulse points of discerning clientele worldwide, a new, unexpected fragrance drifted into my life, or rather, an old one, long forgotten, resurfaced. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, nestled amongst the usual stack of invoices and industry journals. A single, cream-colored envelope, heavier than it looked, with no return address. Only my name, Rosalind Hayes, and the Aetheria Botanicals office address were handwritten in a sharp, angular script I vaguely recognized. But it was the seal that made my breath catch, a small, embossed gold insignia, a stylized alembic intertwined with a serpent. I hadn't seen that seal in, dear God, almost 15 years. My heart began a slow, heavy beat against my ribs. There was only one person who used that seal, Daniel Sterling, my partner from a lifetime ago, from a fiery, ambitious, ultimately doomed niche perfume project we'd poured our youthful hearts and meager savings into. Daniel, who was brilliant, volatile, and always chasing shortcuts. Daniel, who, according to the last fragmented reports I'd heard, had vanished after a messy legal entanglement involving foreign investors and questionable ethics, presumed by some to have met a rather unfortunate end. I slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener, my hand surprisingly steady. Inside, a single sheet of thick watermarked paper, a few terse lines in that same familiar handwriting. Rosalind, we know who truly funded Seraphine Holdings in its infancy. You're not the only ghost in this story. Let's meet. The Old Workshop, midnight Friday. D. The Old Workshop, an abandoned distillery on the city's industrial outskirts, where Daniel and I had first tried to distill our dreams into reality, a place I hadn't thought about in years. My blood ran cold. Funded Seraphine Holdings in its infancy? What did he mean? Seraphine was my creation, built with my resources, my foresight. Friday night arrived with a persistent, drizzling rain. The old distillery loomed out of the darkness, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised purple sky. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp stone, decaying wood, and a faint, ghostly trace of forgotten herbs and resins, a phantom limb of our past ambitions. He was there, just as the note promised, stepping out from the deeper shadows of a crumbling brick archway. Daniel Sterling. Older, leaner, lines etched around his eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before, but the same restless energy, the same knowing, almost predatory smirk playing on his lips. He wore a worn leather jacket, much like the one he'd favored all those years ago. It was as if he'd simply stepped out for a breath of air and returned a decade and a half later. Long time, Rosalind, he said, his voice a low rumble that echoed slightly in the cavernous space. Daniel, I replied, keeping my own voice even. I thought you were gone, for good. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Reports of my demise, as they say, were greatly exaggerated, or perhaps conveniently accepted. Watching you, Rosalind, watching you take Aetheria, watching Seraphine Holdings bloom, that gave me a rather compelling reason to resurface. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, metallic flash drive, tossing it towards me. It landed on a dusty workbench with a soft clink. What's this? I asked, not moving to pick it up. Proof, he said, his smirk widening. Proof that the seed money for Seraphine Holdings, the initial, untraceable capital that got it off the ground, it flowed through an offshore account I set up just before I took my little sabbatical. An account designed to mature quietly in the background, which means, my dear Rosalind, that legally, ethically, I own 49% of your little empire. My stomach twisted. 49%. It was an outrageous claim. Impossible. That's not possible, I said, more to myself than to him. You were gone. You signed over everything from our old venture before you disappeared. Ah, signatures, he interrupted, a gleam in his eye, so easily replicated, especially when one has access to the right sort of artist. And now I want in. Half the profits, Rosalind, half the power, or I leak everything. The true origins of Seraphine, the irregularities, the board, the media, your precious investors. Everyone will know. The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. After everything, after Eleanor, Julian, Marcus, to have this ghost from my past rise up, threatening to unravel it all. I had just fought off jackals, only to find a wolf at the door. He thought he had me. He really did. I looked at Daniel Sterling, at his confident smirk, at the flash drive glinting in the dim light. He expected me to crumble, to negotiate, perhaps even to beg. He'd always mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. It was a common error. I let the silence stretch for a moment. The only sound, the drip, drip, drip of rainwater from a hole in the roof. Then I smiled, a small, knowing smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. You didn't come back for power, Daniel, I said, my voice soft but carrying in the still air. You came back because you're broke. His smirk faltered, just for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. You wouldn't have waited 15 years if you were sitting on a gold mine, or if that little flash drive truly held the keys to my kingdom. You would have cashed in long ago. You've got nothing, do you? That flash drive, it's a bluff, a desperate one. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. Want to bet your empire on that, Rosalind? Instead of answering, I reached into my own coat pocket and pulled out a slim folder, not unlike the one I'd presented in the Aetheria boardroom. I held it out to him. Perhaps you should review this first, I said. I already knew you were alive, Daniel. For quite some time, actually. His eyes, which had been narrowed in a predatory squint, widened slightly. He took the folder, his movements suddenly less assured. After our little venture dissolved, I continued, and you so conveniently vanished, I learned a valuable lesson about loose ends, about the importance of meticulous record-keeping and due diligence. When I started Seraphine Holdings, I built it on a foundation of absolute legal transparency, at least for myself. I traced every penny, every investment, every source of funding, including certain dormant offshore accounts that showed peculiar, albeit minor, initial contributions. He was flipping through the pages now, his face growing paler with each turn. I've been tracking that particular offshore account you used, the one you thought was your secret ace, for years, Daniel. And about 6 months ago, just as I was finalizing the complete consolidation of Aetheria's ownership under Seraphine, my legal team undertook a full audit and, let's call it, a cleansing of all early-stage, ambiguously sourced seed funds. We identified your little forgotten piggy bank, and we bought it, legally, for pennies on the dollar, I might add. It was listed as a non-performing, abandoned asset. I paused, letting it sink in. You see, Daniel, you used what you thought was a ghost account, and I used it quite legally to bury your claim before it ever had a chance to haunt me. You don't own 49% of anything. You own a handful of dust. His face was a mask of disbelief, then dawning fury. You set me up. No, Daniel, I said, stepping back as the heavy hum of an engine sounded outside, followed by the sweep of headlights through the grimy windows. I simply finished the story you tried to erase, and I wrote a much better ending. The old workshop door creaked open, and my head of security, a formidable but impeccably polite gentleman named Arthur, along with 2 members of my legal team, stepped inside. They didn't look at Daniel with aggression, merely with a calm, professional finality. He thought he was a ghost, come back to haunt me. But darling, I've learned to bottle ghosts. His grin faded when I slid my own folder across the table. You see, Daniel, while you were hiding in the shadows, I was meticulously cleaning house. Your phantom investment, it was legally exercised months ago. Daniel backed away, defeated. As Arthur and the lawyers escorted him out into the rainy night, no drama, no raised voices, just quiet efficiency, I stood there for a long moment in the echoing silence of the old distillery, breathing, just breathing. The air still held those faint, ghostly traces of our youthful dreams, but now they no longer had any power over me. I stood there in the quiet aftermath. No cheering crowds, no grand pronouncements, just the gentle hum of the city outside and the clean, crisp scent of possibility. I had lost a sister, a friend, a mentor. My family, as I knew it, was fractured, perhaps irrevocably. The old world, the one of naive trust and easy loyalties, was gone. But in its place, I had found something far more precious, the pure, unadulterated fragrance of my own strength, my own peace. And that, I realized, was the most exquisite perfume of all. Back in my true sanctuary, my personal lab at Aetheria Botanicals, the one filled with light and the promise of new creations, I took down the few remaining mementos of that old life. The polite, posed family photographs, the small gifts from people who had, in the end, valued ambition over affection. My space became simpler, cleaner, more focused. Walls lined with carefully labeled amber bottles holding essences from every corner of the world. Shelves filled with notebooks, not of bitter memories, but of new formulas, new olfactory journeys I was eager to explore. I didn't rebuild Aetheria alone this time. I sought out collaborators, true artisans, people whose eyes lit up when they spoke of rare ingredients, whose hands understood the delicate dance of extraction and blending. We built a team based on mutual respect, on shared passion, on transparency. The company thrived, not just financially, but creatively. It became a beacon of what artisanal perfumery could be, should be. On the wall above my main workbench, where I spend most of my days, I hung a small, framed piece of vellum. It wasn't a famous quote or an award. It was a simple handwritten formula, not for a perfume, but for a state of being, perhaps. It read, essence of resilience, distilled patiently, tincture of truth, applied liberally, absolute of self-worth, never compromised, infusion of peace, aged to perfection. They had tried to erase me, to reduce my life's work to a footnote in their own self-serving narratives. They had underestimated the quiet woman in the lab, and when the ghosts of the past came calling, one by one, I met them, not with anger, not with vengeance in the way they might have understood it, but with preparedness, with clarity, and with the quiet, unshakable strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for. Sometimes the most profound revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It isn't about tearing down, but about building something beautiful, something lasting, something true, on the very ground where others tried to bury you. It's permanent. It's peace. My journey, perhaps it resonates with you in some way. I believe that within each of us, there's an inner strength, a secret garden of resilience that no one can touch unless we allow them to. Betrayal, it doesn't have to be the final note. It can be the catalyst, the discordant tone that forces us to recompose our lives, to plant new seeds of wisdom, of self-respect. Justice doesn't always arrive in a thunderclap. Sometimes it's cultivated, quietly, patiently, from within. If you've ever felt that sting of being underestimated, of being pushed aside, or if you faced the sharp edge of betrayal from those you held dear, I invite you to share your own story in the comments below. I read every single one because each story shared is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to rise, to rebuild. And if you found a part of your own journey reflected in mine, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell. Here at TK Revenge Story, we believe in the power of these narratives, these quiet revolutions of the soul, and we have many more to share. We'd be honored to have you as part of our community. Your support, even a small gesture through the super thanks button, means the world to us. It helps us continue to bring these important stories to light, because sometimes simply listening, simply sharing, is a profound act of healing for all of us. Thank you for being here.